My son was found in the snow behind a storage shed during a Colorado blizzard. He was 9 years old. He had asthma. And according to the paramedics, he had been outside for 47 minutes. When the hospital called me, I thought they were going to tell me he had gotten sick. Instead, a nurse said something that made me pull my truck onto the shoulder of the highway. A witness claimed my father had locked him out. My father, the man who never missed a chance to tell people how much family mattered. The man who called himself a proud grandfather. What he didn't know was that before that night ended, he would lose every bit of control he thought he had. But first, I needed to find out how my son ended up alone in the snow. Welcome back to Her Dignity Stories. If stories about dignity, family betrayal, and standing up for yourself are why you're here, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Now grab a warm drink, leave the noise behind, sit comfortably, and let me tell you what happened. My name is Claire Whitaker. I'm 33 years old. The call came at 9:43 on a Thursday night. I was sitting in my truck outside a gas station near Grand Junction. I had stopped for coffee and gas between emergency response meetings. The coffee was still sitting in the cup holder when my phone rang. The nurse asked if I was Noah Whitaker's mother. The second she said his name, I knew something was wrong. Parents know. Sometimes we know before the words arrive. She told me Noah had been brought in by ambulance. His asthma had flared up. His body temperature was dangerously low. They were warming him slowly and running tests. I stepped out of the truck without realizing it. Cold wind hit my face. Snow blew across the parking lot. A man was pumping diesel into a pickup 3 spaces away. Someone walked out of the convenience store carrying a bag of ice. The whole world kept moving. Mine stopped. Then the nurse transferred me to a paramedic. He sounded exhausted, like he'd been working the storm all day. He confirmed Noah was stable. Then he gave me the detail I still can't forget, based on witness statements and security footage. Noah had been outside for approximately 47 minutes. 47. Not 7. Not 10. 47. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called my father. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I called my mother. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. That frightened me more than the storm. Because if this was all some misunderstanding, why wasn't anyone answering? I got back into the truck and started driving toward the hospital. The roads were slick. Snowplows were still clearing the interstate. The windshield wipers barely kept up. About 20 minutes into the drive, my phone connected to Bluetooth. An old voicemail started playing automatically. I almost skipped it. Then I heard Noah's voice. Quiet. Careful. Like he didn't want someone nearby to hear him. Mom? There was a pause, then another. Can I ask you something? I remembered the message immediately. He had sent it nearly 3 weeks earlier. I had been busy, rushing between meetings, handling emergency shelter requests after another storm. I listened once and told myself we'd talk later. Then his voice came through the speakers again. What if Grandpa gets mad again? My hands tightened around the steering wheel, because for the first time that night, I stopped wondering what happened during those 47 minutes. And I started wondering how long my son had been afraid before I noticed. 3 weeks earlier, none of this felt like a disaster. It felt like a childcare problem. My emergency response team had been assigned to support storm shelters across western Colorado. The deployment was expected to last 10 days, maybe longer if the weather got worse. As a single mother, I didn't have many options. My regular babysitter was out of state. Every after-school program I called was full. My parents offered to take Noah before I even asked. My mother said it would be good for him. My father said I worried too much. At first, I felt relieved. Noah knew their house. He had stayed there before. Most people would have thought it was the perfect solution, but Noah didn't look happy when I told him. We were sitting at the kitchen table. I was filling out school paperwork. He was working on a model airplane. The glue bottle sat beside his elbow. Pieces of plastic wings were spread across the table. Then he stopped working. What if Grandpa gets mad again? I looked up. What do you mean? He shrugged. I don't know. That was it. No explanation. No story. Just that one question. I remember thinking he was talking about one of Grandpa Gordon's moods. My father had always been strict. He could be impatient. He could be loud. But I never imagined I needed to be worried. I walked around the table and squeezed Noah's shoulder. You're going to be fine. A few minutes later, my father came through the garage door. He was there to pick up a toolbox he had left behind. The moment Noah saw him, he got quiet. Not scared, just quiet. My father noticed the airplane kit. He picked it up and examined it. Still working on this thing? Noah nodded. My father laughed. Boy needs to toughen up. I rolled my eyes. That sounded exactly like him. He had spent my entire childhood saying things like that. Football builds character. Boys shouldn't cry. Work comes first. Feelings come later. Then he looked at me. Your mother babies you too much. Noah didn't respond. He stared down at the instruction sheet. I remember noticing how quickly the excitement disappeared from his face. At the time, I brushed it off. Now I wish I hadn't. The next few days were busy. I packed winter gear, prepared deployment paperwork, updated emergency contacts at Noah's school, checked weather reports every few hours. Everything seemed organized. Everything seemed under control. The night before I left, I checked Noah's backpack. His inhaler was in the front pocket. His lunch account was funded. His homework folder was packed. I even taped a note inside his backpack that said, "Love you. Call me anytime." The next morning, my truck was loaded before sunrise. The air was freezing. The driveway was covered with fresh snow. Noah hugged me before I left. My father stood beside him, one hand resting on Noah's shoulder, smiling, looking like the caring grandfather everyone believed he was. For a moment, I felt foolish for worrying. Maybe Noah's question meant nothing. Maybe I was overthinking it. Then I climbed into my truck. As I backed out of the driveway, I glanced in the mirror. Noah was still standing there, watching me leave. There was something in his expression I couldn't explain. Not sadness, not fear. Something else. Something that stayed with me during the entire drive. 3 days later, I got my first email from his school. And that was when my concern started turning into something much harder to ignore. The first few days didn't seem serious enough to worry about. At least that's what I told myself. I was staying at a temporary operations center outside Montrose. My days started before sunrise. Most nights ended after 10. We were coordinating shelter space, transportation, and emergency supplies for several counties. Everything felt rushed. Everything felt urgent. So when Noah started acting a little differently during our video calls, I explained it away. The first call came on my second night there. I stepped outside the operations building during a break. The air smelled like diesel from the generators. Snow was piled along the parking lot. I called Noah while eating a sandwich from a vending machine. Normally, he would talk nonstop. He would tell me about school, about a book he was reading, about something funny his friend Caleb said at lunch. That night, he barely spoke. How was your day? Fine. What did you do after school? Nothing much. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When we hung up, I stared at the screen. Something felt off. But kids have bad days? I told myself not to overthink it. The next evening, I called again. This time, Noah seemed a little more relaxed, for about 30 seconds. Then I watched his eyes shift toward the doorway. His shoulders tightened, and he immediately stopped talking. A second later, my father walked into the room behind him. Everything okay? Gordon asked. Noah nodded. My father looked directly into the camera. He's fine. Then he smiled, the same smile he used around neighbors and church friends, the smile that always made him look reasonable. The call ended less than a minute later. The same thing happened 2 days later. And then again after that. Every time Noah seemed ready to talk, something changed. Usually it happened when my father entered the room. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I started paying attention, really paying attention. Noah wasn't looking at me during our calls anymore. He kept glancing toward the door, sometimes toward the hallway, sometimes toward whoever was walking past the room, like he was making sure nobody could hear him. One afternoon, I called during my lunch break. Noah answered from the kitchen, for the first time all week. He actually sounded excited. "Mom, something happened at school today." I smiled. "What happened?" He opened his mouth, then suddenly stopped. I watched him look over my shoulder, not at me, at someone behind him. A second later, my father appeared. He was carrying a coffee mug. "We don't complain in this family," he said. The words were casual, almost joking, but Noah immediately went quiet. My father sat down at the table. "Tell your mom about the good things." Noah stared at the countertop. The excitement disappeared from his face. Just like that. I changed the subject, asked about homework, asked what he wanted for dinner when I came home. He answered every question with 1 or 2 words. The call ended a few minutes later. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because of what my father said, because of how Noah reacted. Kids don't shut down like that for no reason. The next morning, I opened my email before our daily briefing. Most of the messages were weather updates, supply requests, road closure notices. Then I saw one from Noah's school. The subject line made my stomach tighten. It simply said, "Concern regarding Noah Whitaker." And suddenly, those short video calls didn't feel so harmless anymore. The email arrived at 7:12 the next morning. I was sitting in a folding chair inside the operations center. A cup of stale coffee sat beside my laptop. Outside, snow was still falling. Inside, people were talking about road closures and shelter capacity. I almost ignored the message. Then I saw Noah's name in the subject line. My stomach tightened immediately. The email was from his teacher, Mrs. Reynolds. It wasn't an emergency, at least not officially. But something about the wording bothered me. She said Noah seemed quieter than usual. She said he appeared distracted in class. She asked if there had been any recent changes at home. I opened the school portal right away. Like most parents, I normally only checked it for grades and attendance. That morning, I started looking deeper. The first thing I noticed was the pickup log. Every student had a daily record. Who picked them up? What time they left? Simple information. Nothing unusual. At first, then I started scrolling. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. A pattern appeared almost immediately. Noah was consistently one of the last students picked up. Sometimes the very last. One afternoon, he wasn't signed out until nearly 40 minutes after dismissal. That surprised me. My parents lived less than 15 minutes from the school. Then I checked Evan's records. Evan attended the same school, same dismissal time, same pickup area. But Evan was always collected early. Sometimes 10 minutes before the final bell because of sports activities. Sometimes immediately after class ended. Never late. Not once. I sat back in my chair. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Noah wanted extra library time. Maybe Evan had activities. But the feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. So I kept looking. The library records were linked through another section of the portal, 3 separate afternoons. Noah had signed into the school library after dismissal. Alone. Not with friends. Not for a class project. Just sitting there, waiting. The entries showed how long he stayed. 22 minutes. 31 minutes. 38 minutes. I pictured my son sitting by himself between bookshelves while other children went home. That image bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Then I found the teacher notes. Most were ordinary, completed assignments, participated in discussion, good behavior. Then one note stood out. Mrs. Reynolds had entered it 3 days earlier. He seems unusually anxious. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time, anxious. That wasn't a word teachers used casually. I opened the pickup records again. This time, I looked at the signatures. And that's when I noticed something else. Every single time Evan was picked up, the signature belonged to Gordon, my father. Every time. But Noah's pickup signatures belonged to my mother, Marla. Every single one. I checked 2 weeks of records. Not once had my father signed Noah out. Not once. He drove to the school for Evan, he walked inside for Evan, he signed the forms for Evan, but never for Noah. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But after the strange video calls, it didn't feel like nothing anymore. It felt deliberate. I stared at the screen for a long time. One grandson got attention. The other got waiting time. One grandson got grandpa. The other got whoever was available. For the first time, a question entered my mind that I didn't want to ask. Was my father intentionally keeping his distance from Noah? A notification popped into my inbox before I could answer it. Another message from Mrs. Reynolds. This one included an attachment, a photo of a drawing Noah had completed in class. I clicked it open, and the moment I saw it, my heart dropped. I opened the attachment expecting a simple classroom drawing, maybe a snowman, maybe a mountain, maybe one of the airplanes Noah loved sketching in the margins of his notebooks. Instead, I found myself staring at a picture that I couldn't stop thinking about for the rest of the day. The drawing showed a house. Nothing unusual about that. Kids draw houses all the time. It was a simple 2-story home with a chimney, a driveway, a few trees, snow covering the ground. The kind of picture an elementary school teacher probably saw every day. Then I looked closer. There were people standing inside the house. I counted 4, 1 in the kitchen, 2 near a window, 1 standing by the front door, all of them smiling. Then I noticed the figure outside, a small boy, standing alone in the snow, away from the house, away from everyone else. My chest tightened. I zoomed in on the image. The boy was drawn smaller than everyone else, almost like he didn't belong there. Below the picture was a short note from Mrs. Reynolds. The class assignment had been simple. Draw a place where you feel safe. I read that sentence twice. Then I looked back at the picture. The boy wasn't inside the house. He was outside, standing alone. My phone rang before I could think much further. It was Mrs. Reynolds. I answered immediately. She sounded kind, the same way she always sounded during parent conferences. "I'm sorry to bother you while you're away," she said. "It's okay. What's going on?" There was a short pause. Then she asked if I had seen the drawing. I told her I had. Neither of us spoke for a second. Finally, she said something that made my stomach drop. I asked Noah who the boy was. I gripped the phone tighter. "What did he say?" Mrs. Reynolds sighed softly. He said, "Sometimes that's me." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Outside the operations center, snow was falling harder. A generator hummed somewhere nearby. People were walking past carrying boxes of emergency supplies, but all I could hear was that one sentence. "Sometimes that's me." Mrs. Reynolds explained what happened. The students had spent nearly 40 minutes working on the project. Most children drew bedrooms, living rooms, pets, parents, normal things. Noah spent most of the class erasing and starting over. When he finally finished, he stared at the paper instead of turning it in. That's what caught her attention. She wasn't accusing anyone of anything. She made that clear. But she thought I should know. I thanked her for calling. Then I sat alone in my truck for nearly 10 minutes after the conversation ended. I opened the picture again. The longer I looked at it, the worse it felt. Because kids usually tell the truth in drawings. Not the whole truth, but pieces of it. Pieces they don't always know how to explain out loud. I started remembering other things. The short video calls. The way Noah kept looking toward doorways. The pickup records. The teacher note describing him as anxious, individually. None of it seemed dramatic. Together, it painted a different picture. A picture I didn't like. That evening, I called Noah again. When he answered, I asked about school. His answers were short, just like before. I wanted to ask about the drawing. I wanted to ask what he meant, but something stopped me. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear it. Then I heard my father's voice somewhere in the background. Noah heard it too. His eyes shifted toward the hallway immediately. The conversation changed, just like every other call. 5 minutes later, we hung up. I sat staring at my phone. The feeling in my stomach was no longer concern. It was fear, real fear, because for the first time, I started wondering if my son felt safer at school than he did at home. The next morning, another email appeared in my inbox. This one wasn't from his teacher. It was from the school counselor, and she wanted to schedule a conversation as soon as possible. The school counselor called me the next morning. I took the call from inside my truck before the daily operations briefing started. The parking lot was covered in fresh snow. Workers were unloading bottled water from a delivery truck. My phone showed 8:06 a.m. The counselor introduced herself as Melissa Harper. Her voice was calm, professional, but there was concern underneath it, the kind that makes a parent sit up a little straighter. She told me she had spent some time talking with Noah over the previous week. Nothing formal, just casual conversations during lunch and recess. At first, she thought he was simply missing his mother. Kids often struggled when a parent traveled for work, especially younger children. But then she started noticing patterns she couldn't ignore. The first thing she mentioned was lunch. Apparently, Noah had been eating alone most days. That surprised me. Noah wasn't the most outgoing kid in the world, but he usually sat with 2 boys from his class, Caleb and Ryan. They had been friends since 2nd grade. Melissa explained that Noah had started avoiding the cafeteria table where his friends sat. Instead, he chose a corner table near the windows, alone, almost every day. I asked if he had argued with anyone. She said no. No bullying reports, no conflicts, nothing obvious, just distance. The second thing she mentioned bothered me even more. Noah startled easily, a classroom door slamming, a teacher raising their voice across the hallway, a coach shouting instructions during gym, things that normally wouldn't affect him. Melissa said she had personally seen him flinch more than once. That didn't sound like my son, at least not the son I knew. Then she paused, long enough for me to know something worse was coming. She told me she had asked Noah how things were going at home, not directly, just normal conversation, the way counselors are trained to do it. At first, he gave simple answers. Everything was fine. School was fine. Grandma was fine. Then he said something that stayed with me. Grandpa says boys who cry are weak. For a moment, I didn't say anything, because that sounded exactly like my father. Exactly. I could hear Gordon's voice saying those words. I had heard versions of that sentence my entire life. Melissa continued. She wasn't accusing anyone of abuse. She made that clear. But she wanted me to know what Noah had shared. Then she told me something else, something that made my stomach drop. She said Noah often compared himself to Evan, my nephew, my father's favorite grandchild, whether he admitted it or not. According to Melissa, Noah had said, Evan doesn't get in trouble. That sentence hit harder than the others, because children notice fairness, maybe better than adults do. They notice who gets praised, who gets blamed, who gets picked first, who gets ignored. And apparently Noah had noticed everything. At that point, I need to ask you something. If you were hearing this about your child from a school counselor, what would your reaction be? Would it be worried? Or would it be angry? Let me know which one in the comments, because I can tell you exactly what I felt. Both. Melissa recommended continued observation, nothing official, nothing dramatic, just paying closer attention, keeping communication open, documenting concerns if they continued, documenting, That word stuck with me. After the call ended, I sat in silence for several minutes. Then I opened a folder on my laptop. I saved the teacher's email. I saved the counselor's notes. I downloaded copies of the attendance records, the pickup logs, the comments from the school portal, everything. At the time, I told myself I was simply being careful, a concerned mother gathering information, nothing more. But a question kept repeating in my head. Was Noah dealing with a difficult environment? Or was something bigger happening inside that house? That afternoon, I created a second folder. This one wasn't for school records. This one was for evidence. And without realizing it, I had just started building a file on my own family. The folder started as something simple. At least that's what I told myself. A precaution. Nothing more. That afternoon, after my call with the school counselor, I opened my laptop in the operations center and created a folder on my desktop. I named it Noah. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious, just Noah. Then I started saving things. The teacher's email was the first file. The note about him being anxious was the second. Then the school pickup records. Then the attendance reports. I downloaded everything. Not because I thought I needed evidence, because I didn't trust my memory anymore. Too many small things had happened. Too many moments I had explained away. I needed a timeline, something concrete, something I could look at without emotions getting in the way. That night, after everyone else had gone back to their motel rooms, I sat alone in the command trailer. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A weather radar flickered across one of the monitors. I opened a spreadsheet. The first entry was Noah's question. What if Grandpa gets mad again? I entered the date beside it. Then I added the shortened video calls, the library records, the drawing, the counselor's notes. One line at a time, one date at a time. As I built the timeline, a pattern started appearing. Not proof, not yet, but a pattern. And patterns matter, especially when you're trying to understand what isn't being said. The next thing I saved was the voicemail, the same voicemail I would later replay 100 times. I exported a copy from my phone and uploaded it into the folder. Then I listened to it again. Noah's voice sounded smaller every time I heard it. What if Grandpa gets mad again? At the end of the recording, I could still hear my father's voice in the background, sharp, impatient, demanding to know who Noah was talking to. The first time I heard it, I ignored it. Now I couldn't stop hearing it. Around midnight, I called my friend Lisa. We had worked together for years. She was practical, level-headed, the kind of person who always told the truth, even when you didn't want to hear it. I explained everything, the school reports, the drawing, the voicemail, the video calls. There was a long silence. Then she asked a question. If this was someone else's child, would you be worried? I answered immediately. Yes. Then why are you trying so hard not to worry about your own? That question stayed with me. The next morning, I took another step. One I almost talked myself out of. I called Rachel Moore. Rachel was a family attorney in Grand Junction. I had met her 2 years earlier when she handled paperwork for a friend of mine. I wasn't trying to hire a lawyer. Not really. I just wanted advice. A reality check. Someone to tell me I was overreacting. Rachel listened for nearly 20 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she asked a few questions. Simple ones. How long had Noah been staying there? Had there been previous concerns? Were there written records? Were there witnesses? Did the school document observations? Everything felt very official all of a sudden. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, professional. I can't tell you what's happening in that house. I looked out the trailer window at the snow. My stomach was in knots. Then she said something that changed the way I approached everything afterward. Keep documenting. That was it. 3 words. No accusations. No dramatic warnings. Just 3 words. Keep documenting. I asked if she thought I was overreacting. There was a pause, and then she answered carefully. The people who ignore warning signs usually wish they hadn't. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. Part of me felt ridiculous. Maybe Noah was just having a rough week. Maybe he missed me. Maybe my father was simply being my father. Strict, old-fashioned, insensitive, nothing more. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not one big thing, 100 little things. The kind of things that only become obvious when you put them side by side. So I kept building the timeline. I saved screenshots, downloaded reports, organized emails, created folders. By the end of the week, I had more than 30 files, and I still wasn't sure what they meant. What I didn't know was that the next piece of the puzzle would arrive during a birthday celebration. A birthday that would answer some questions and create even bigger ones. Noah's birthday fell right in the middle of my deployment. I hated that. For 9 years, I had never missed one of his birthdays. Not one. Even when I was working double shifts. Even when money was tight. We always found a way. A cake. A movie night. Pizza. Something. This year was supposed to be different. 3 days before his birthday, I transferred money to my mother. I even added a note. Make sure Noah gets the cake he wants. A few minutes later, she texted back, "Of course." I believed her. That morning, I called before school. Noah sounded excited. For the first time in days, there was energy in his voice. He told me he wanted a chocolate cake. Not fancy, just chocolate, with blue frosting. The same cake he asked for almost every year. I laughed and told him that sounded perfect. Then he asked if I would video call during the party. I promised I would. The party started at 6. I stepped outside the operations center a few minutes early. The snow had finally stopped. For the first time all week. The sky was clear. I called Noah. My mother answered. The camera moved around the living room. Balloons, wrapping paper, paper plates. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then I noticed something strange. There were 2 names on the banner. Noah and Evan. I frowned. I thought maybe I was seeing things. Then I heard my sister Beth laughing in the background. My mother casually explained it. We decided to celebrate both boys together. I didn't like that. Evan's birthday wasn't for another 3 weeks. But before I could say anything, the camera moved again. And I saw the cake. It wasn't blue. It wasn't chocolate. It was a giant sports-themed cake. Covered in football decorations. Exactly the kind of cake Evan would choose. Not Noah. Not even close. I asked Noah if he liked it. He hesitated, then said, "It's okay." That answer hurt more than if he had complained. The camera shifted again. This time, I noticed where everyone was sitting. Evan sat in the center of the table. My father sat beside him. My sister sat beside him. Even the pile of presents was stacked near Evan's chair. Noah was sitting at the far end, almost out of frame, like an extra guest. Not the birthday boy. I tried to ignore the feeling in my stomach. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe I was looking for problems because of everything else. Then gift opening started. Evan went first. One present, then another, then another. Football gear, a new gaming headset, gift cards, a Denver Broncos jersey. Everyone clapped, everyone laughed. I waited for Noah's turn. It never came. Finally, I asked him what he got. He looked confused for a second, then glanced toward my mother. Grandma said my present is coming later. Coming later. I looked at the pile of wrapping paper. There wasn't a single gift with Noah's name on it. Not one. Before I could process that, my father stood up. He raised his plastic cup. Everyone got quiet. Then he smiled at Evan. Evan earned his celebration this year. The room laughed. My stomach dropped. Earned, not shared, not celebrated together. Earned. Like one child deserved recognition and the other didn't. I immediately looked at Noah. His eyes were fixed on the table. Nobody seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed and didn't care. Then came the candles. 9 candles. And 12. Combined onto one cake. The room started singing. I watched Noah the entire time. He never smiled. When the song ended, Evan leaned forward first. He blew out most of the candles. The rest went out a second later. The adults cheered. The kids laughed. And Noah never got the chance to blow out his own birthday candles. Not even once. At that moment, I want to ask you something. If you were watching your child sit at the edge of his own birthday party like a stranger, would you call it a misunderstanding? Or would you call it favoritism? Type misunderstanding or favoritism in the comments. Because sitting there in the cold outside that operations center, I already knew my answer. The call ended shortly afterward. Everyone looked happy, except Noah. Later that night, I replayed the recording 3 times, then 4. Each time I noticed something new: the seating, the cake, the gifts, the candles, the way Noah barely spoke, the way nobody seemed concerned. And suddenly the timeline I had been building no longer felt paranoid. It felt necessary. I opened my laptop, attached every email, every school report, every voicemail, every screenshot, every note, every drawing. Then I sent the entire file to Rachel Moore. For the first time, I wasn't collecting information anymore. I was preparing for whatever came next. The morning after Noah's birthday, I stopped treating my concerns like a collection of unrelated incidents. Until then, every warning sign had come with an explanation: a shy kid, a strict grandfather, a stressful week, a child missing his mother. But after watching that birthday video 3 times, I couldn't convince myself anymore. The cake wasn't Noah's. The gifts weren't for Noah. The attention wasn't on Noah. And nobody in that room seemed to notice or care. I got up before sunrise and drove to the operations center. The roads were still covered in packed snow from the previous storm. My windshield was coated with ice. I sat alone in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes before going inside. Instead of checking weather reports, I opened the folder on my laptop, the folder named Noah. It had started with one email from a teacher. Now it contained screenshots, attendance logs, counselor notes, voicemail recordings, photos, and a copy of the birthday video. I uploaded everything into a secure file sharing link and sent it to Rachel Moore. By 8 o'clock that morning, she called. I stepped into an empty conference room to answer. Rachel had reviewed most of the files. She didn't sound emotional. She sounded focused, professional. That worried me more. The first thing she said was simple: "I want to open a formal file." I sat down. For a moment, I just stared at the table. Because opening a file meant crossing a line, not legally, emotionally. It meant admitting that my concerns were serious enough to document. Rachel explained that a formal file wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a custody case. It wasn't an accusation. It was a timeline, a place to preserve records, a way to make sure details couldn't be forgotten later. I agreed. Within minutes, paperwork arrived by email. I signed it electronically from my phone. The timestamp showed 8:27 a.m. That detail ended up in the file too. Everything did. After that, Rachel became methodical. She wanted every document organized by date, every conversation logged, every concern recorded, nothing verbal if possible, everything written, everything saved. The next person I contacted was Melissa Harper, the school counselor. I forwarded her an email and asked a simple question: would she continue documenting any concerns regarding Noah's behavior while I was away? Her response arrived less than an hour later. Yes. Any observations would be entered into his student record. I saved that email immediately. Then I created additional folders: school, medical, communication, photos, video. At some point, I realized I was treating my own family like a case. That realization made me feel sick. Nobody wants to investigate their parents. Nobody wants to wonder whether their child is safe around grandparents. But every new piece of information seemed to point in the same direction. That afternoon, Rachel called again. This time, the conversation became more serious. She asked detailed questions about Noah's living situation. Who picked him up from school? Who supervised him after school? Who handled meals? Who made medical decisions? Who kept his inhaler? Questions I had never expected to answer, especially about my own parents. Then Rachel suggested something I hadn't considered. A formal caregiving review, nothing aggressive, nothing public, just an official evaluation of the temporary arrangement while I was deployed. The paperwork was straightforward. I read every page, then I signed it. The next morning, Rachel confirmed the request had been submitted. Later that afternoon, she confirmed the court had accepted the initial filing. No hearing date, no investigation, not yet. Just an official record showing concerns existed. The strange thing was that my family had no idea. Every evening, I still called Noah. Every evening, I spoke politely to my parents. Every evening, I acted as though everything was normal. My father sounded completely relaxed, completely confident. He had no idea that school records, counselor notes, attendance logs, and videos were being organized into a timeline. He had no idea that an attorney was already involved. He had no idea that concerns had already reached the court system. Part of me still wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe I was seeing patterns that weren't there. Maybe I was connecting dots that didn't belong together. But then I would replay Noah's voicemail, or look at the drawing, or remember his face during that birthday party, and the doubt would disappear. 3 days later, my phone rang during lunch. My father's name appeared on the screen. The second I answered, I knew something was wrong. He wasn't calm, he wasn't irritated, he was furious. An antique pocket watch had disappeared from his office, and according to Evan, Noah had taken it. My father's call came just after lunch. I was reviewing shelter capacity reports when my phone started vibrating across the table. The moment I saw his name, I knew something was wrong. He almost never called me during work hours. I answered immediately. Before I could say hello, he started talking. Actually, yelling. His antique pocket watch was missing. The watch had belonged to his grandfather. I had heard stories about that watch my entire life. He kept it in a wooden display box inside his home office. Nobody was allowed to touch it. Nobody. According to my father, he had opened the box that morning and found it empty. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. Evan saw Noah take it. Just like that. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Case closed. At least in my father's mind, I asked if anyone had searched for it. He ignored the question. I asked if Noah admitted taking it. He ignored that too. Instead, he repeated the same thing. Evan saw him. The call ended with my father saying he was going to teach Noah a lesson about responsibility. Those words stayed with me all afternoon, because I knew my father. And when Gordon Whitaker decided he was right, facts stopped mattering. That evening, I called Noah. His eyes were red before he even spoke. I knew he had been crying. Kids can hide a lot of things. They can't hide that. I asked him what happened. At first he said nothing. Then I gently asked about the watch. The tears came immediately. I didn't take it. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He sounded scared. The kind of scared that breaks your heart because you know nobody has been listening to him. I asked if anyone had searched his room. He nodded. I asked if they found the watch. He shook his head. Then he whispered something that made my chest tighten. Grandpa doesn't believe me. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps. Noah looked toward the hallway, just like he always did, like he was checking who might be listening. Then the call ended. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I called my mother. I hoped she would calm things down. Instead, she made everything worse. Marla told me Noah should apologize. I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. Apologize for what? She sighed, the way people sigh when they think you're making life difficult. It would keep the peace. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Nobody had found the watch. Nobody had any proof. But somehow, my 9-year-old son was expected to admit guilt anyway, just so the adults could move on. That afternoon, I called Noah after school. He was sitting at the kitchen table. I recognized the cabinets behind him. I asked if he had apologized. He shook his head. Then my father walked into the frame. His face was already red. "Evan doesn't lie." He said it directly into the camera, like he wasn't talking to Noah, like he was talking to me. Then he pointed a finger toward my son. "Your mother made you soft." I felt my grip tighten around the phone. Noah stared at the table, silent, small, completely defeated. My father kept talking. He said boys needed consequences. He said accountability mattered. He said Noah needed to learn respect. Nobody mentioned evidence. Nobody mentioned facts. Nobody mentioned the missing watch hadn't been found. Only Evan's accusation mattered. That was enough for everyone. The storm warning arrived that evening. Every local station carried it. Heavy snowfall, strong winds, dangerous overnight conditions. My phone buzzed with weather alerts every hour. I saw them. My father saw them too. Everybody in Colorado saw them. Around 7 o'clock, I tried calling Noah. No answer. I waited a few minutes and called again, still nothing. I assumed they were eating dinner. An hour later, I tried again. Nothing. I sent a text message. No response. At 8:41 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Noah. Only 3 words. "I'm sorry, Mom." I stared at the screen. Sorry for what? He hadn't done anything. I called immediately. No answer. Again. Nothing. Again. Straight to voicemail. My stomach was in knots. At 9:12 p.m., my father finally answered. His voice sounded cold, almost annoyed. I asked where Noah was. There was a pause, long enough to scare me. Then he said something I will never forget. "Maybe some time outside will help him think." The line went dead. For a second. I couldn't move. Then I started calling back. Again. And again. And again. No answer. Every call went straight to voicemail. At that exact moment, while I was sitting in my truck staring at my phone, a security camera across the street was recording everything happening outside my parents' house. None of us knew it yet. Not me, not Noah, and certainly not my father. But that camera was about to become the most important witness in the entire story. The first person who truly saw what happened that night wasn't a police officer, it wasn't a paramedic, and it wasn't me. It was my father's neighbor, a retired electrician named Harold Harlan. Everyone called him Mr. Harlan. He lived directly across the street. 2 years earlier, somebody had stolen several packages from his porch. After that, he installed security cameras around his property. One above the garage, one facing the driveway, one pointed toward the street. The system recorded 24 hours a day, most of the time. He forgot it was even there, until that night. I didn't learn any of this until later, after the hospital, after the police reports, after the interviews. But once I saw the footage, I never forgot it. The timestamp started at 7:46 p.m. Snow was already falling. Not heavily, just enough to dust the sidewalk and driveway. The camera showed my parents' front porch. The front door opened. My father stepped outside. Noah followed him. My heart stopped when I noticed what my son was wearing. A gray sweatshirt. Jeans, sneakers, no winter coat, no gloves, no hat. The video had no sound, but you could still understand exactly what was happening. Noah was talking, trying to explain something. His hands moved while he spoke. His head shook back and forth. Then my father pointed toward the yard. Noah didn't move. My father stepped forward and shoved him off the porch, not hard enough to knock him down, but hard enough to make his point. "You're staying outside." Then my father turned around and went back inside. The door closed. The porch light stayed on. And my son was left standing there, alone. The timestamp continued. 7:47, 7:48, 7:49. Noah knocked on the door. Nobody answered. He waited. Knocked again. Still nothing. At 7:55, snow had started collecting on the porch railing. At 7:58, Noah sat down on the front steps. At 8:03, he stood up and knocked harder. Nobody opened the door. Nobody came outside. Nobody checked on him. I watched all of this later in a small room at the sheriff's office. Deputy Alvarez sat across from me. A box of tissues sat between us. Neither of us touched it. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen, because I knew exactly what Noah was doing. He wasn't being defiant. He wasn't refusing to apologize. He wasn't acting out. He was waiting for the adults to forgive him, waiting for someone to let him back inside, waiting for someone to remember he was only 9 years old. At 8:11, something changed. Noah bent forward, hands on his knees, trying to breathe, even without sound. It was obvious. His asthma was starting. The cold air was hitting his lungs. His inhaler was inside the house. The same inhaler I packed before leaving. The same inhaler I reminded him to keep nearby. The same inhaler he couldn't reach. The footage continued. 8:16, 8:19, 8:22. Noah left the porch. Slowly. Carefully. He crossed the yard toward the detached storage shed near the back fence. The wind was stronger there. Snow blew sideways across the property. For several minutes, the camera lost sight of him. Then another camera angle picked him up again. This time he was stumbling. His legs looked weak. He fell once, pushed himself back up, took a few more steps, then collapsed beside the shed, and didn't move again. At 8:31 p.m., Mr. Harlan received a motion alert on his tablet. He opened the security app. At first, he thought an animal had triggered the camera. Then he recognized Noah. He immediately pulled on boots and a winter coat. By the time he reached the shed, Noah was curled up in the snow, barely responsive. His lips were turning blue. Mr. Harlan called 911 before he even tried moving him. That emergency call later became part of the investigation. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Deputy Miguel Alvarez arrived shortly after. While emergency crews worked on Noah, Mr. Harlan mentioned the security cameras. That changed everything. Deputy Alvarez immediately collected copies of the recordings. Every angle, every timestamp, every minute. The footage was preserved before anyone could delete it, before anyone could change their story, before anyone even realized what had been captured. The question that haunted me later was simple. Did my father know any of this was recorded? Did he realize a camera across the street had watched the entire thing? The answer came about an hour later, while investigators were reviewing footage, while Noah was being treated in the emergency room. While I was still driving through the storm toward the hospital, my father walked through the hospital entrance completely unaware that the most important witness in the case wasn't a person. It was a camera. I arrived at the hospital just after midnight. The parking lot was covered in snow. Emergency vehicles lined one side of the building. My boots slipped twice while I ran toward the entrance. A nurse met me near the emergency department. She led me to Noah's room. Nothing in my life prepared me for that moment. My son looked so small in that hospital bed, his cheeks were pale. An oxygen tube rested beneath his nose. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside him. His inhaler sat on the tray table, the same inhaler he couldn't reach when he needed it most. I grabbed his hand. It felt cold. Not freezing, but colder than it should have been. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. I just stood there holding his hand, trying to remind myself he was alive, trying to remind myself I wasn't too late. About 20 minutes later, the door opened. My father walked in. My mother followed behind him. Gordon still looked angry. Not worried, not ashamed. Angry. Like this entire situation was somehow inconvenient for him. Then he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. He brought this on himself. I stared at him. I honestly couldn't believe those words had just come out of his mouth. My son was lying in a hospital bed, and that was his first concern. Before I could respond, another person entered the room. Rachel Moore. My father looked surprised, then confused. Rachel wasn't alone. Deputy Alvarez walked in behind her. Everything changed after that. The confidence disappeared from my father's face. The deputy informed him that security footage had been collected. Footage showing exactly what happened. Every minute. Every timestamp. Every moment Noah was left outside. My father tried to interrupt. The deputy didn't let him. Then Rachel placed a folder on the table. The same folder I had spent weeks building. Emails, school reports, counselor notes, attendance records, the drawing, the voicemail, the birthday video. Everything. My father stared at it. For the first time all night. He looked nervous, because he finally understood something. The investigation hadn't started because of the storm. The investigation started weeks earlier. The storm was only the final piece. Deputy Alvarez explained that the school counselor had already submitted documentation. The school records had already been preserved. The timeline had already been reviewed. The court had already accepted the initial caregiving evaluation request. My father kept looking from person to person, like he couldn't understand how things had moved so quickly. The truth was simple. They hadn't moved quickly. I had started moving weeks earlier. Then another surprise arrived. My sister Beth entered the waiting room with Evan. Evan looked terrified. Not because of Noah, because of the watch. A social worker had spoken to him while everyone was waiting. And eventually, he admitted the truth. The antique pocket watch had never been stolen. He accidentally dropped it in the garage while playing with it. Then he got scared. So he blamed Noah. The watch was found less than 30 minutes later behind a toolbox shelf. Exactly where Evan said it would be. Nobody spoke for several seconds. My father looked stunned. My mother started crying. I looked toward Noah's room and thought about every punishment, every accusation, every insult, every moment my son had been blamed for something he didn't do, all because one person decided Evan could never be wrong. By sunrise, social services had opened a formal investigation. Deputy Alvarez filed his report. The hospital filed theirs. The school counselor submitted additional documentation. Everything became official. Everything. Later that morning, I signed paperwork terminating my parents' temporary caregiving authority immediately. No more pickups, no more supervision, no more visits without my approval, no more second chances. My father thought he lost control because of a snowstorm. He didn't. He lost control the day I started paying attention. He lost control the day I started documenting. He lost control the day I chose my son over family appearances. The snowstorm simply exposed what had already been happening. 2 days later, Noah was discharged from the hospital. The first night home. I tucked him into bed, just the two of us. No lawyers, no deputies, no reports, no investigators. Just a mother and her son. As I turned off the bedroom light, Noah looked up at me. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You believed me?" I felt my throat tighten. Because underneath everything else, that was the question that mattered most. Not the watch, not the investigation, not the court. That question. I sat down on the edge of his bed, then I squeezed his hand. "I started believing you long before anyone else did." For the first time in weeks, Noah smiled. A real smile. And in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. Before I end this story, I want to say something to anyone watching who feels trapped by toxic family members, whether it's a child, a parent, a sibling, or someone you've loved for years. Please don't ignore what your instincts keep telling you. Pay attention. Document the truth. Protect your peace. And never sacrifice your dignity just to keep someone else comfortable. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Her Dignity Stories. If this story resonated with you, there are many more stories on this channel about family betrayal, quiet strength, and people who finally stand up for themselves. I think you'll enjoy those as well. And in the next story, we'll follow a woman whose family spent years treating her like a burden until one document at a lawyer's office changed everything. Until then, take care of yourselves. And remember that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is finally believe what they've been seeing all along.